The wedding hall glittered with golden chandeliers and the soft glow of fairy lights woven through the high ceiling beams. Music drifted through the air, a romantic ballad played by a live string quartet. Laughter echoed as couples spun across the polished floor, champagne glasses clinking in joyful toasts. Every table was dressed in white linen, sparkling crystal, and fragrant roses, but she sat quietly at the farthest one, her hands folded neatly in her lap, the stem of a half-empty glass of water sweating against her palm. Her dress was simple, pale blue chiffon, one she had bought years ago and never had a reason to wear until tonight. Compared to the glittering gowns of sequined silver and deep velvet reds that shimmered across the dance floor, hers looked understated, almost invisible. But maybe that suited her, because she wanted to vanish. She had been invited out of courtesy. The bride was a distant cousin, someone she barely kept in touch with except for obligatory greetings at family gatherings. Still, when the envelope arrived with its embossed gold letters, she had felt a spark of hope. Perhaps this wedding would be a fresh start, a chance to reconnect, to belong. Instead, it was turning into a painful reminder of everything she had lost. At another table, she spotted familiar faces, her ex-fiancé's relatives. They hadn't noticed her yet, but she knew it was only a matter of time before the whispers started, before one of them walked over with false sweetness and sharp eyes to ask how she was coping. The very thought made her stomach twist. She remembered the day she thought would be hers, the engagement party where she had worn a white dress and imagined her own wedding. Her fiancé had promised forever, whispered vows that tasted like honey, and then shattered them when someone richer, glossier, more fitting, came along. He had moved on with ease, while she had been left to pick up shards of her pride and stitch her heart together alone. Now, seated in this hall filled with candlelight and joy, she felt that ache sharper than ever. Each laugh sounded louder, each couple more radiant. She felt like the outsider at her own life's celebration, invisible and unnecessary. Her fingers toyed with the edge of her napkin. Should she leave, slip away quietly before the music swelled into more couples' dances, before the champagne had people's tongues loosened enough to gossip openly? She pictured herself walking out into the night, heels clicking across marble, the cool air embracing her solitude. The idea tempted her. Then she felt it, the shift in the air beside her. Someone had slid into the empty chair to her right. She startled, turning, and her eyes landed on a man who didn't look like anyone else in the room. He wore a tailored black suit, crisp shirt unbuttoned just enough at the collar to reveal he wasn't trying too hard. His shoulders were broad, posture straight, the kind of stance that came naturally to someone used to control. But it was his eyes, steady, piercing, yet strangely kind, that held her. For a moment, she wondered if he had sat down by mistake, but then he leaned closer, his voice a low murmur meant only for her. "Pretend you're mine tonight." Her breath caught. She blinked, certain she had misheard him. His lips curved into the faintest smile, as though he were amused by her confusion. "What?" she whispered, her voice barely audible above the music. "Pretend you're mine," he repeated, his tone calm, almost playful, but with an undercurrent of certainty, like he knew she would agree. "It'll save us both some trouble." She searched his face for explanation, but all she found was a confidence that unsettled her as much as it intrigued her. Around them, the hall buzzed with merriment, but in that small bubble between the two of them, time seemed to slow. She should have pulled back, should have asked who he was and why he had chosen her out of everyone. Instead, she sat frozen, her heart thudding in her chest, the echo of his words sinking deep. "Pretend you're mine tonight." She didn't know it yet, but those words were about to change everything. She stared at him, her pulse fluttering like wings trapped in her chest. It was the strangest, boldest thing anyone had ever said to her, and she didn't know whether to laugh, protest, or run. But he didn't look away. His eyes stayed locked on hers, steady, reassuring, with a spark of mischief that made it hard to breathe. He leaned back in his chair, as if they'd been together all along, and picked up the wine glass in front of him. "Relax," he murmured, taking a sip before setting it down again. "You look like you want to disappear." "I know the feeling." She blinked, confusion still clouding her. "Why would I pretend?" "Because," he interrupted smoothly, tilting his head toward the nearest group of guests, "half this room is watching you." And I'm not in the mood to be cornered by every distant aunt and matchmaking cousin who wants to know why I'm still single. So, you and me. A deal. Tonight, we belong to each other. Her eyes widened. You don't even know me. His smile was quick, almost boyish, though the lines of his jaw betrayed something sharper, more controlled. Not yet, but I know enough. She shook her head in disbelief, though her lips curved despite herself. You're insane. Maybe, he admitted lightly, his voice a low rumble that carried more warmth than arrogance. But trust me, it's better than sitting here alone and being picked apart like prey. She wanted to argue, to insist she didn't care what anyone thought. But the memory of the mocking glances earlier, the way her ex's relatives had already started whispering from across the room, silenced her. She hated how vulnerable she felt, hated how right this stranger was. Her gaze flickered back to him, trying to piece him together. He didn't look like anyone else in the hall. The other men were polished in a practiced way, bankers, lawyers, men who had inherited their charm as much as their suits. But he carried himself differently, like someone who lived outside this glittering bubble. And when he finally offered his hand, palm up, the gesture felt less like a request and more like an invitation she wasn't sure she could refuse. "Dance with me," he said simply. The words should have been ordinary, but the way he said them made her heart stumble. She hesitated only a second before slipping her hand into his. His grip was strong but careful, guiding her from her chair. Heads turned as he led her toward the dance floor, his stride confident, protective, like he'd already claimed her. The music swelled, a soft waltz played by the quartet. He drew her close, one hand resting firmly at her waist, the other holding her hand with surprising gentleness. She stiffened at first, overwhelmed by the sudden attention. But then he leaned down, his breath brushing her ear. "Relax," he whispered. "Just follow me." And somehow, she did. Her steps, awkward at first, began to fall in rhythm with his. He moved with effortless grace, guiding her across the floor as though they'd danced together 100 times before. The whispers she had dreaded earlier now circled around them, but instead of mocking, they carried surprise. Admiration, even. The lonely girl in the corner was no longer invisible. She was at the center of the room, in the arms of a man who looked like he belonged anywhere he went. She dared a glance up at him, ready to ask who he really was, but the question died on her lips when she saw his expression. He wasn't just playing a part. For all his talk of pretending, there was something real in the way he looked at her, something that made her chest tighten. "Who are you?" she asked softly. His lips curved, but his eyes softened. "A pilot. Just landed a few hours ago. Thought I'd stop by before the jet lag wins." A pilot. That explained the confidence, the posture, the way he carried the air of someone used to navigating storms. She almost laughed. It felt too perfect, too impossible. "You don't even know my name," she pointed out. "Then tell me," he said without missing a beat, spinning her elegantly before pulling her back into his arms. "We've got all night." And for the first time in months, maybe years, she felt something inside her stir, something dangerously close to hope. The music slowed, fading into the background hum of laughter and clinking glasses, but neither of them seemed eager to leave the dance floor. His hand lingered at her waist, steady and warm, while their eyes held longer than strangers should. The world around them blurred. The swirling gowns, the glitter of chandeliers, the endless chatter, and for the first time that night, she forgot where she was supposed to fit. It didn't feel like pretending anymore. He leaned closer, his voice soft enough that only she could hear. "You're better at this than you think." She laughed under her breath, shaking her head. "I'm tripping all over your shoes. I've flown planes through thunderstorms. Trust me, you're easier to handle than crosswinds at 30,000 feet. The words, playful yet sincere, pulled a smile from her she hadn't realized she was still capable of. She looked up at him, really looked, and noticed the faint shadows under his eyes, the kind that belonged to someone who lived between time zones. There was strength in his posture, yes, but also loneliness in the way he held her just a little tighter than necessary. "Do you always rescue women sitting alone at weddings?" she asked, her tone teasing but edged with curiosity. His expression softened. "No," he admitted quietly. "Most nights, I'm the one sitting alone." The honesty in his voice surprised her, sent a tremor through the fragile walls she'd built around herself. She wanted to ask more, to press into the solitude he carried like a hidden scar, but before she could, a familiar voice sliced through the music. Well, well, look who finally found someone to pretend with. Her body froze. She knew that voice, dripping with smugness. Slowly, she turned her head and found him, her ex-fiancé, standing just a few feet away, drink in hand, smirk plastered across his face. His tie was loosened, his cheeks flushed with alcohol, and his eyes glittered with cruel amusement. "Didn't think you'd show your face here," he sneered, glancing at the pilot dismissively before settling his gaze back on her. "Guess you didn't want people to see you're still desperate." The words hit harder than she wanted to admit, each syllable reopening wounds she thought had healed. She started to pull back, to retreat the way she always had when he used that tone, but before she could, the pilot's hand at her waist tightened, steadying her. He turned to face the ex, his expression calm but his eyes sharp as steel. "Careful," he said, his voice low, measured, and commanding. "You're talking to my partner." Her ex barked a laugh. "Partner, please. She can't even." "She can," the pilot cut in, his tone unflinching. "And she will. She's worth 10 of you, and you're too blind to see it." The hall went quiet, eyes turning toward the confrontation. For a moment, it felt like the entire wedding was holding its breath. Her heart hammered, her throat tight, but beneath the fear was something new, something fierce. No one had ever defended her like that before. No one had spoken about her as if she were valuable, strong, someone to be protected rather than pitied. Her ex's smirk faltered, the alcohol not enough to shield him from the humiliation of being put in his place. Muttering something under his breath, he staggered back toward the bar, his bravado shrinking with each step. When the crowd slowly shifted their attention elsewhere, the pilot looked down at her. His jaw was still tense, but his gaze softened. "You okay?" She swallowed hard, blinking back the sting in her eyes. I think so." "You don't have to think," he said gently. "You are." Her breath caught. In that moment, she realized the truth. This wasn't part of the charade anymore. His words, his touch, his defense of her, it was all real. And deep down, she knew she was starting to feel the same way. The night air was cool when they finally stepped outside, leaving behind the glittering hall and its lingering whispers. The courtyard was quiet, lit only by strings of soft golden bulbs and the moon overhead. She inhaled deeply, letting the silence settle in her chest like a bomb after the chaos inside. He hadn't let go of her hand, and she realized with a start how natural it felt, how reluctant she was to let it slip away. For a moment, they just stood there, the faint hum of music drifting through the closed doors behind them. Then he turned, studying her with that steady, unwavering gaze that had unsettled her earlier but now anchored her. "You didn't have to do that," she said quietly. Her voice was still unsteady, replaying the way he had stepped between her and her ex with such calm certainty. "Yes, I did," he replied without hesitation. "No one talks to you like that. Not while I'm here." The words struck her deeper than she expected. She looked down, blinking, trying to find the right response, but all she could manage was a soft laugh. "You make it sound like you've known me forever." "Maybe I don't need forever," he said, his lips curving into a half smile. "Maybe tonight is enough." She searched his face, trying to decipher what he meant, but all she found was honesty. No game, no pretense, just him, and somehow, that terrified her more than the mocking crowd inside. She had been burned before, promises that melted like smoke, vows that turned to ash. Was she really ready to believe again? "You make it sound so easy," she whispered. He stepped closer, his hand brushing against her cheek with a gentleness that startled her. "It isn't easy," he admitted. "I spend half my life in the sky, landing in cities I don't belong to, walking through airports full of strangers. It's lonely. You learn to put up walls." His thumb grazed her skin, lingering. "But then I saw you tonight, and I knew. You looked like someone who was tired of walls too." Her chest tightened. She had never told anyone how exhausting it was, always pretending she was fine, holding herself together while people whispered behind her back. And yet here was this man, this stranger, peeling back layers she hadn't meant to show. Her voice cracked when she spoke. "What if I can't trust again? Then let me earn it," he said simply. "One step at a time. No pretending." Just us. The silence stretched, filled only by the sound of her heartbeat hammering in her ears. She wanted to believe him. God, she wanted to. But belief meant risk, and risk meant pain. Yet when she looked into his eyes, she saw no mockery, no arrogance, just patience, just a quiet strength that felt like safety. She drew in a shaky breath, and before she could second-guess herself, she whispered, "Okay." His smile was slow, almost disbelieving, like he hadn't expected her to say yes. Then he bent slightly, pressing his forehead to hers. And the world narrowed to that moment, the warmth of his breath, the steady weight of his hand, the unspoken promise between them. "I'll take you flying someday," he murmured. "Show you the world the way I see it. From above the clouds, where everything feels possible." She laughed softly, the sound breaking through her tears. "I've never even been on a plane." "Then you'll start with me," he said, his voice low, certain. "I'll be your first flight." Something inside her cracked open then, something she thought had long since withered. Hope. She lifted her face, closing the tiny distance between them, and kissed him. It wasn't a grand, sweeping kiss, not the kind that belonged to fairy tales or movie screens. It was soft, tentative, but real. Real in a way nothing had been for her in a long time. When they pulled back, both breathless, the world didn't look the same. The wedding behind them, with all its glitter and judgment, no longer mattered. What mattered was this: two people who had walked into the night alone but were now leaving it together. And as he laced his fingers with hers, leading her down the quiet path away from the hall, she knew one thing with absolute certainty. She wasn't pretending anymore.